Protests were not just centralized in San Francisco. Here in New England, many gathered to voice their concerns over China's treatment of Tibet.
Today in Cambridge, Massachusetts, dozens of Tibetan-Americans shaved their heads in protest. NECN's Stephen Iandoli is in Harvard with more. Stephen.
Well, good evening, Karen. On the same day that Olympic torch arrived in the United States, there were many Tibetan protesters, as you mentioned, that gathered in Harvard Square in Cambridge. One of their main missions, to prevent that torch from ever entering Tibet, a place where protesters there have been clashing with the Chinese government for some time now as the Summer Games get ready to arrive.
The eyes of the world will shine on Beijing for the 2008 Summer Olympics. The Chinese government wants the spotlight to shine on a booming economy and prosperous nation. Tibetans hope that glare exposes the brutality they say has led to more than 100 deaths of protesters in the months leading up to the Games.
Tibetans are not happy under the present Chinese leadership, and their policies are not helpful, in fact very harmful, and we can't live under that system.
Dr. Sanjay helped lead a Massachusetts-based protest of the Chinese government in Cambridge Wednesday. Before a 26th straight night of candlelight vigils and prayer, 53 people had their heads shaved as a show of solidarity and mourning for those who have died.
If the world community has some sense of conscience, some sense of morality and justice, and they should stand up for Tibetan people before the Olympics, certainly, and even after the Olympics.
Dawa Doma donated her hair to Locks of Love the same day her husband was in San Francisco to protest the arrival of the Olympic torch at its only North American stop.
The way they are treating for Tibetan people, that's not right to do that.
Chinese government officials have said Tibetans have every right to worship, but they also have every right and obligation to enforce their country's laws. Laws they say one local resident and Tibetan natives' siblings broke, leading to their imprisonment.
We protest for the Chinese government, not for the Chinese people. So I hope it's like whole world they heard Tibetan peaceful protests.
Tibetan protesters also want the Chinese government to open a dialogue with their exiled spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, for a peaceful resolution in Tibet.
Now, some have urged President Bush to boycott the opening ceremonies in Beijing. He originally said he would not do that. As late as today, his press secretary was non-committal on that issue. In Harvard Square in Cambridge, I'm Stephen Iandoli, NECN.
Stephen, are they planning any other protests? I know they've been doing it off and on. What about the rest of the week?
They're continuing to do the candlelight vigils and prayers, and along with those prayers, they do chants, Karen, right here in Harvard Square. They continue doing that for probably up until the opening games.
All right. Thank you very much, Stephen.